Good morning and welcome to Motivational Mornings, the podcast that gets you going before you get going. Good morning and welcome to Motivational Mornings. My name is Vivi, and again, I'm here with my co-host Ryan, and today we're going to be discussing the book Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. Now, as this book may sound, Never Eat Alone is about opening up relationship and establishing relationships throughout your career and also personal life as well, if you want to interpolate it that way. So one of the first points I found about this book is that real networking, Keith says, is about finding ways to make other people more successful. It's about working hard to give more than you get. You see, most people think about networking as a way to ask someone for something, and then in return, that your life will be better because now you've networked with them and then maybe they can help you out. But Keith says that the real key is actually finding ways to make the other person more successful. And doing that over the course of many, many times is how you actually get more successful yourself through the law of reciprocity. On that note, he says, when you're trying to do this, stop keeping score. Keith has found that during the time of his friends and networking pastimes, he's found that people who keep score on networking, maybe on different favors that people have given each other, are actually a lot less likely to succeed in the long term. He said, don't keep score. Don't be afraid to ask as long as you're willing to give just as much and if not more. And just by giving over the course of many, many years will develop your networking success and prowess a lot more than if you're just seeking favors and being that guy who just wants something for themselves. Another point I found was his interesting take on relationships. Keith refers to relationships as muscles. He says relationships are like muscles. The more you use them, the stronger they get. Whereas a lot of people these days see relationships like a pie, a finite structure that only has so many slices to be given before it runs out. So start thinking about your relationships as muscles and exercise them, make them stronger over time so they can grow and grow and grow, as opposed to a finite structure much like a pie.
I think that's a great point, Vivi. I think you have to try and continually build these relationships you have, or else they don't get stronger. I think they tend to get weaker. So I think it's so important to keep focusing on them and building them up and I guess flexing your relationship muscles. I want to go back though to when you mentioned to stop keeping score. And I think that's something that's so important. I know in a previous episode we discussed give and take, and there was a 5-minute favor. And that's what this reminds me of, that whenever someone asks you to do something or asks for a favor and it takes you less than 5 minutes, the answer should automatically be yes. You shouldn't be keeping score. You should just want to help the person out. And I think by doing this and continually being or wanting to help other people is going to help you build your relationships and build your network, because they're going to see how genuine you are. And then I think on a positive note of that, the more successful your network is, then you're going to have a better network to reach out to. So I think it's such a great point that we shouldn't be keeping score. And we just want to be helping as many people as we can.
It's a great addition, Ryan. Another point I wanted to talk about is how Keith considers that people with a low tolerance for risk, whose behavior is usually guided by fear, have usually a low propensity for success. So what do I mean by that? Keith gives an example by a big wheel tricycle that he talks about. So his dad and him would drive through this neighborhood, and they grew up relatively poor and not with the best of conditions. And so one time driving back home, his dad saw a tricycle in, I think almost like at the garbage of some lady's nice house in the neighborhood. And he pulled up and he asked the lady if he could have the tricycle so that maybe his son could use it and not if it go into the trash. And obviously, like, this is quite a sentimental story, because you'd imagine someone coming up to your house and asking you for your trash is like kind of like you feel really bad for them. But Keith in that story learned that people who just don't have a tolerance for failure and who are just willing to go out there and just ask for anything to make them become more successful or maybe achieve a certain means. Like for Keith's dad, it was to getting his son a tricycle because he couldn't afford it. Have usually a higher propensity for success because you're not afraid. You're not guided by fear. And so I think that's a really, really big lesson, at least for me. Like I definitely sometimes am guided by the fear of what if I fail in this, and what if, I don't achieve this. And I think more so moving forward, I'm going to think about like, okay, let's just ask for what are things I'm looking for and try to help as many people as I want, and then see how things go. I hopefully, and that will be a much higher chance of successful endeavors in certain fields. And also to add to the point of having a low tolerance for risk, Keith adds later on that in today's world, mean guys actually finish last. So don't go ahead asking people for things just because you want to achieve something and you want to successfully boost yourself to another economic level, or you want to, gain a certain friendship or gain something for a personal standpoint. Do it just because you're a nice person and you want to help people out. Keith goes on to explain that because most of us have so many options these days. Think about the social media influencers who are just giving away thousands and thousands of pieces of information for free, and people online who are just, doctors or physios or chiros or accountants who are just giving away countless information for free. Those are the people who actually tend to finish first because they're a lot more nicer and they just happen to just give and not expect anything in return, but also aren't like super mean in that aspect. And also because everyone has so many options, they don't need to stick with you anymore. 50 years ago when there was a few people in town that could perform a certain task and you knew nobody else and they happened to be mean, you didn't have many options. But these days it doesn't work like that. You have so many options, and we live in a globalized world, so that you can work with people all across the world, which increases the competition, and at the result makes, I think, people a lot more nicer if you happen to approach it that way.
I totally agree with that. I think that's a great point. With social media these days, word travels fast. So I think one, like you said, people have options. And if you're not nice and they don't want to work with you, they don't have to. And then on top of that, through social media and through word of mouth, people are going to hear about that and they're not going to work with you. This reminds me of a story about a famous CEO, and he ended up selling his company for, I don't know the exact number, but let's say 200 million. And they had a handshake deal. So he never actually signed any of the legal documents. They didn't have an actual contract, but they both agreed that this other company would buy the initial company for a certain price. Well, fast forward 4 months, they got busy. The contract was never signed, and some event happened. I think maybe it was an energy company, and energy prices went up through the roof. So this company being sold was now, instead of worth 200 million, it was worth 400 million. So now they came back to the table, and the purchaser was like, okay, how much are you going to gouge me for? How much more are you going to charge me? Because this company is obviously worth a lot more than we initially agreed on. And the CEO selling the business just shook his hand and he's like, hey, no, you just won $200 million. Great job. And what happened? So why didn't he try and gouge this guy? Well, he said they had a handshake deal and it was up to him and they should honor it. And you might think he's crazy. You might think, wow, he just threw away $200 million. But actually what ended up happening is people heard about this. His reputation carried. So all of a sudden they find out this guy is a super genuine, nice guy. And then everyone wants to do deals with him. So he easily made back that $200 million because they just saw how nice and genuine he was.
And to follow along on just being genuine, like the example you gave, Ryan, I think another thing that Keith talks about that I found really interesting was when you have something to say it with passion. Keith goes along to explaining that having something to offer when you speak and say it with sincerity is far more meaningful than just blabbering and talking all the time. He also goes on to explain that in networking situations, it's actually far better to spend more time with fewer people and have one or two meaningful dialogues in 1 hour than to engage in the wandering eye routine like most people do in a conference or a meeting situation and not actually really get to know anybody. Along with that point, Keith also states that studies have found through Columbia that the more speaking you do or the more presenting you do, the more successful you tend to actually become. So they found an actual correlation between speaking engagements and tax income brackets, or being able to just generate more income. So along with being able to just have something to say and saying with passion, put yourself out there and just be able to talk at certain points. Maybe it's at work and you can just give a little bit of a insight on the thing that you've done that has contributed. Maybe you can start that way, or maybe it's at your local community, or maybe it's your local church or your gym, talking about a specific thing that you're passionate about. Just get up there and talk more. Maybe one day you'll end up talking in front of many people, and then that will be a sense of enjoyment and fulfillment because you've helped a lot of other people in their life.
Another bit of advice this book gives on networking is creating a rating system for your contacts. So grab all your contacts and you're going to number them 1, 2, or 3. And what these numbers mean is how close you are, how well you know these contacts. And that's going to determine how often or how frequently you're going to keep in touch. So for example, if you label someone a 1, these are the ones that get contacted very frequently. You can even add them as favorites into your contacts. And then whenever you have a moment during your day or you have spare time, just give them a call or shoot them a text just to see how things are going. And you probably want to do this at least once a month for people on your list with 1s. So people that you rate 2 or give a 2, you know them, but not as well. So maybe you want to reach out quarterly and you'll have just maybe an email or a text to meet up for lunch just to see how things are going, because you want to keep in touch. But you don't need to reach out to them as often just because you don't know them as well. Another good idea is maybe you want to add them to your annual holiday card if you mail out Christmas cards or New Year's cards or anything. Or maybe give them a call on their birthday. So one thing to note, though, that he mentioned in the book is if you do the annual holiday card, make sure it's genuine and make sure you're not just writing down everyone's names and giving everyone a card. I think what happened to Keith, he was mentioning, was he had all these different lists. So he had people from work, he had friends, people from school, and he would send them all Christmas cards. But the issue was there was some overlap. So he got an email from one of his friends saying, "Hey, thanks for the 4 Christmas cards you sent me," because he didn't realize that the friend was on 4 different lists. So he sent him 4 different cards. So that's one mistake we don't want to make. We want to make sure it's genuine and that if we're sending out the cards, we actually mean it and we're not sending people duplicate cards. So now you're also going to have people rated 3. And so these are they're more like acquaintances. You don't know them as well. Maybe you've only met them once or twice, but they're probably good people to know. Maybe they work in your industry or they have skills that you want to learn about. So these ones you're not going to contact as often, but I think it's always good to reach out to them maybe once a year or something. So maybe if they live somewhere else and you're visiting that town, maybe give them a quick call or shoot them an email saying, "Hey, I'm going to be visiting your town in the next week or so. Do you have time to meet up for lunch and catch up?" Something like that. So that would be a 3. So Keith mentions that he thinks it's a really good idea to have a game plan, have these lists of contacts and rate them and know how frequently you should be visiting or reaching out to them. Because I think it's so easy to forget. And even though we should be reaching out monthly to some people that you're really close with, we just forget and push it off. Next thing you know, we haven't spoken to them in years. That wraps up today's episode of Motivational Mornings. If you want to learn more about the book or maybe listen to some points that we didn't discuss, you can check out Blinkist. We'll put the link in our show notes below. Click on the link, the referral link, and you'll get a free 7-day trial of Blinkist. And you can get the book, Never Eat Alone, and it'll give you a 15-minute summary of the book. Thanks for listening, guys, and have a great day.